Chella Ramanan. I'm originally from London in the UK. I currently live in Sweden because I am a senior writer at Massive Entertainment, to Ubisoft Studio. I was senior narrative designer on Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. Prior to that, I was a games journalist. For a long time, I was a freelance video games journalist. During that time, I did stuff for the BBC, wrote some articles for The Guardian, did lots of presenting for places like BAFTA and the V&A Museum. So that was a fun, varied job for all those years. I also work in the indie games sector as well. So I have my own micro studio called Threefold Games. Our debut game was Before I Forget, which came out in 2020, was nominated for a BAFTA, which was amazing. So we're currently working on our second game, which is Windrush Tales, about a period of immigration from the Caribbean to the UK between 1950s. Well, our game is set in the 1950s, but it spanned 50s to 70s to early 70s. I'm also co-founder of POC in Play, POC standing for People of Color, and it's an organization founded to improve the visibility and representation of BIPOC people, both in games and in the games industry.
Man, you got a lot there to unpack there. So before we kind of dive into that, sort of, where did you start? Like, how did you even get to the point to where you knew you wanted to go down the path that eventually you took? How did you get to Massive? Like, how did you even navigate that way? Just from my experience doing these interviews and whatnot, it's not a lot of women as far as representation in the gaming industry. So how did you navigate that and have the mindset of, this is where I'm gonna go, this is how I'm gonna do it, and you know, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, it was a long journey, basically. I did a degree in English literature, and when I graduated, you don't really get a job coming out of a degree. It doesn't lead directly to something. So I just did like jobs like being a receptionist at several places, and then I was working in PR for a bit, and for a long time actually. I was a PR assistant. Yeah, but I was always wanted to be a journalist, so I always wanted to write in some capacity. So I was always writing prose on the side, and then like trying to write a novel or something, or short stories, and attending like evening classes and stuff to learn about that craft. So then I started doing like writing for free, basically, for a games website, which is what you did back then. That was thankfully people don't tend to do that anymore, because they're just like, you're not going to pay me, I'll do my own thing. The landscape was different then. So I worked for games, basically. So I'd review and I'd get to keep the game, which is cool when you're a gamer. So I like sort of did this side hustle for a long time, writing for a website in the US called gameindustry.com. And then I just sort of like built up my games like journalism career. The gear shift to making it like being properly recognized, and like getting paid for my work and stuff happened when I joined Twitter. Because that's where the games media lived, basically. And it was where game developers, where the industry lived, and it was democratizing. You could reach people, like the barriers were kind of down to reach people. So joining Twitter, and also I sort of accidentally hosted a panel at a geek convention, because that's another story that maybe you want to ask me about. But I ended up hosting this panel called #GamesSoWhite, and it was the year of Jada Pinkett Smith saying Oscars so white. It made me think about the parallels with our industry. So I hosted that, and that led to me getting a Guardian, commissioned by The Guardian to write a piece on that topic. And then that just sort of snowballed into me getting more speaking gigs and having more of a platform. And then in the meantime, I went on a writing retreat called Writing for Games. And for some reason, in all those years of writing about games and playing games and being really interested in the industry, I'd never kind of connected. And also doing writing, like evening classes and wanting to write, I'd never kind of bridged the two and thought, why don't I try writing games?
Yeah.
But I went on that week retreat and it changed everything. I immediately shifted from writing a novel to writing games, and went to a game jam, which is where Before I Forget was born. And then because I already had this platform as a games journalist, when I pivoted into indie games, that got me noticed by people who were looking to build a diverse narrative team at Massive to work on it.
So let's kind of backtrack. What was your gaming background? Like, what were you into? Obviously, story and narrative and all that stuff and gaming sort of go hand in hand. So, in a lot of cases. So, how did you marry those two? Because that is kind of interesting that you didn't sort of naturally make that crossover. It was sort of more of an accident. What were you playing, or what games sort of sparked your creativity?
Yeah, so I didn't play games as a kid because it's just not something we could afford. It's just like not something I could have felt that I could ask my mum for, like a gaming machine. I didn't play games until I went to uni, and like people had brought like their gaming machines, and so that was my entry into the world of games. So I was immediately drawn to more narrative games like Beneath a Steel Sky and the sort of like point and click adventure type stuff. And then like Tomb Raider came out, and that was that sort of action adventure, you know, like the first action adventure kind of stuff. There was a loose story to it, but it was still like compelling. So I played all sorts of games. So I didn't necessarily play narrative games because there weren't that many, especially in AAA, or like we didn't even call it
AAA,
yeah. So like, you know, I was playing Tony Hawk's Skateboarding and you know,
right there.
I loved that game so much. And then like MMOs like City of Heroes, because I was a comic book nerd, had to play that game. Kind of live out those kind of fantasies. It wasn't until like indie games became like a thing. Oh, what was I playing? Oh my God, I'm having to think back through the history books now. Like I didn't pick up Gone Home immediately, but maybe like the Chinese Rooms. Everyone's Gone to the Rapture and stuff like that, you know, because they're much smaller, you know, like Unity made everything so much more accessible. Because the only person that I knew who exclusively wrote for games was Rihanna Pratchett. And at that time, I didn't know her. She was just like, she was like this poster child for this new thing called narrative designer or game writer, because it wasn't really a role either in the early days. It was just someone on the team was like, give it a go. And so like story was not central outside of adventure games like point and click adventures, you know, the sort of like Revolution Software stuff. So like the reason I didn't make the connection is because like Rihanna Pratchett's Rihanna Pratchett, you know, she felt like this lofty, far away person who, you know, she's like daughter of Terry Pratchett. So she comes from this like legacy of authorship and, you know, this literary tradition. And it's those types of people that get to write games. So that's why I didn't make the connection. And a lot of the people who make games before social media were kind of hidden. We didn't know, apart from some of, you know, like the very high profile Japanese developers who we kind of idolized. Like we didn't really know who was behind these things. I guess I am like a typical woman in that respect. I sort of like self-censor. That's one of the things they say about women. They don't apply for roles because they're like, oh, well, I don't have. So I wasn't really aspiring to AAA because other people do that. But I was immersed in the indie scene and going to events and, you know, showcasing Before I Forget in its early stages and stuff. I got to know other indie developers and the indie scene, at least in the UK, that's the one I know the best, I'm sure it is other places, is just like super supportive and is this whole network that is just like out to help each other, basically. I don't know if I've answered your question. Have I answered your question? I kind of went all over the place.
Good. My next question was going to be, because you say you're from the UK and you're in Sweden now. What is the scene like? Because I've never been to either. So, like, what is sort of the scene like around narrative storytelling or gaming? Big? Is it small? Is it local as opposed to sort of branching out? Like, how does that work as far as the areas you've been in?
So the UK games industry, it's significant, and it always has been right from the early days. The indie scene there is kind of it's trying to thrive in the current landscape.
I think that's kind of all indies right now anyway.
Exactly. So yeah, it's kind of like close-knit and supportive. We have, like lots of games events that everybody meets at and stuff, and we have like an equivalent of GDC but on a much smaller scale in Brighton, called Develop, which the whole industry kind of goes to, and it's just a chance for everybody to meet up, kind of like GDC basically. Lots of people don't even bother going in, they just like want to like network. And in terms of narrative, we have so we have this amazing event called Adventure X, which is basically focused on old school adventure games and narrative games. So it's the only event I know really that's like purely focused on narrative games, and it attracts like amazing speakers from all over the world, including the US. And because anyone who's making narrative games like will flock to this space where you have like amazing writers. They have a really well curated sort of exhibition space of like new narrative games coming out from small developers. Sometimes it's a one-person team or a two-person team, and they're from all over the world as well. And so you get to see what's happening in narrative and in the grassroots, like what people are experimenting with. So that's a really, really great event that I always made sure I went to. I've spoken there a couple of times, and it was our first games event that we took it before I forget to. And you get your game in front of your peers, like other people who are like interested in narrative in games, which is invaluable. And then we have the Writers Guild. So that's a long running organization, and it has a games branch, and they have meetups and things as well, and talks and stuff like that. So that's a really great place to meet other writers in games, basically. Like any kind of guild, you can get like legal support and advice and stuff like that if you're a member of the guild. And then I guess BAFTA plays quite a significant role it has things like BAFTA Breakthrough. I was like fortunate enough to be a BAFTA Breakthrough in 2020. So that's people who are early in their career but are seen as making some kind of mark in their industry. So that goes across like film, TV, and games. So you can get like costume designers, TV producers, like cinematographers, all kinds of people.
So basically, if you have a project, you could go there and basically piece together a team if you really want to.
You could. You meet really great, interesting people from all kinds of roles and get access to BAFTA, which is like the academy, basically, a members club, basically, of people from your industry and adjoining industries. So so that's kind of the scene.
Sort of to move along, massive. So how did you sort of land into that? I'm sure it was a very interesting call to get, or just sort of something interesting to see, as I'm sure a lot of people have dreams of like working with companies like that. What was that like? What was that experience like, especially since you have experience working with a big company like that, and also working with indies and stuff like that? So like, what's like the pros and cons? What did you like, didn't like?
And I was just like happened to be in a room where I found out that this role, because I wasn't checking AAA like job, like careers bit of websites, because like I said, I'd kind of like self-censored myself out of that. I was in a room, and it was actually someone who runs the Game Writers Guild in the UK was hosting a small event, and there were writers who'd done like really amazing big stuff for people from like Ubisoft and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, what am I doing in this room with these like amazing writers? Yeah, so that's how I found out about the job. Basically, you know, they just like told people, you know, we're hiring for a project. So if you're interested and can move to Sweden, then I could totally move to Sweden, because I just split up with my boyfriend at that time, and I'd bought him out of the house. So I was kind of like footloose and fancy free. Totally moved to Sweden. I was like, don't be ridiculous. They wouldn't want me, kind of thing. And then one of the people came up and asked for my business card, because it was back in the days when people still had business cards anymore. And then so I gave it to her, and I was like, by the way, I would like to kind of put my name forward for that job. Otherwise I wouldn't have. There were so many moments where I wouldn't have in that leap of faith. So I threw my hat in the ring and applied for the job, got a first interview, got an on-site interview, and then got offered the job, and was in shock. I was in shock. I was just like, it was a huge life change, because I'd been freelance for like 10, 15 years or something. So like, even, you know, like working, well, I wasn't working 9 to 5 really. I was like on retainer at the PR agency that I'd worked at earlier on, and then doing journalism stuff around it and speaking and stuff like that. But very flexible, not 9 to 5, not going to an office. So I moved to Sweden and not AAA, nothing on that scale. So the things that I really liked, so I was like, this could be the biggest mistake of my life, because like, can I deal with Monday to Friday, like 9 to 5? And then it turns out I did actually quite like that structure after a while. Like, games journalism was getting harder and harder. More publications were shutting down. So that meant there were more freelancers on the market. So like, having money in my bank account, like every month, it was like really strange. Obviously I had money, but I didn't know how much it was going to be necessarily every month. So that was really great. And then making games is collaborative. So to be in the room with the other people, and you know, these people are immensely talented. So they pick the best of the best. So like, walking past someone's monitor and they're making some incredible like fern or something to be hot of Pandora, or you know, they're rendering the inside of an RDA facility and it's all like rusty, and you know, or all that stuff, and you're just like walking along to get a drink of water, and you're just like you know, it's really nice and inspiring. Cool. The thing I miss is I was in charge. Like when I'm doing indie, it was me and Claire. We made all the decisions. We knew why they were made. And we were also more agile. As a small team, you were more agile to be able to pivot or change or make decisions. And of course, when it's like a huge project, everything is kind of slower. Even if you can see what's coming down the road, you have to wait for everybody all the way to the top to see, or maybe they see, but they're like, well, I think we can manage our way through this hiccup or hurdle or challenge or whatever. And then sometimes you can't, so then you have to shift focus and all this sort of thing. And that so that's the thing that's challenging with being on a big team, but the level of collaboration is great, and the sort of like visibility, the automatic visibility of your project is nice, whereas you know, like we were having to be on social media and try and you know, do all the
I mean, you had to basically do the legwork, basically.
Exactly. You have to do everything. You have to wear so many hats, whereas it's nice to just be able to focus on your craft and collaborate with other people who are focusing on theirs.
So let's talk about some games. But before I forget, let's talk about that. How did that come about? And what was the feel as you was creating the story, creating characters, and what was the general feel of the game and sort of what you were trying to portray to the audience?
After the writing retreat, I completely shifted my focus to games. And actually, it was a woman at the writing retreat. We both traveled from Southwest England to the north of England on like eastern side to meet each other. And we lived very close to each other. And she was the only other woman on the course. When we traveled back to the Southwest, she said, I'm hosting a game jam, an XX Plus game jam. So it was for women and non-binary people. And so I signed up for that because that initial hurdle of there's a pattern here with me, isn't there? That intimidation of joining a game jam, which would probably be full of men, and they'd probably be more technical than me, or like be programmers and like level designers and things. And I was like, would they really like want just like a writer to rock up? I was thrown together with this person called Claire, and then we just hit it off. We both had the same kind of goals, which was to kind of push the envelope of what we thought games could be and what they could be about and who could be a lead character in a game. The theme was borders. And at the time, Trump was threatening to build a wall. There was a Syrian refugee crisis happening. We looked at geopolitical border type, something to do with that, or like physical borders. And I had this idea that I'd had kicking around in just like a notebook at home. And it just was woman with dementia. That was the idea. And I'd never written it. And then I said, what about psychological borders? I had this, thing about a woman with dementia. And that immediately gave us our location. So we're like, okay. So like maybe she's in a house, like she's an older woman, even though she does have early onset dementia, she's still much older than most female protagonists would be in a video game. And then we were like, so maybe you go around the house and you interact with objects to get memories back. And then we were like, what if the house is in grayscale, and when you interact with an object, because it's bringing this sort of lucid moment back to her, you get color in that part of the room. And so that's like pretty much the elevator pitch of Before I Forget. And it was born that day at that game jam, and we won the Audience Choice Award, which means it was the game people most wanted to see finished. And I think if we hadn't had that like real sort of like validation, we probably would have said, it was really nice meeting you, and like gone our separate ways. But because we got that, we were like, should we like maybe just see how this goes? Like 4 years or as a side project on the side of our other jobs, 4 years later, Before I Forget came out.
How much of it did you have like done, or how much of it was complete, I guess, as it is compared to now, obviously, like
yes,
when people first saw it?
Right. So we had the story. I wrote the story. I remember I was like we went home for the night. So it wasn't a game jam where you stay overnight.
Gotcha.
I went to the host's house. I stayed at her place. But I was like scribbling till midnight or whatever. So I wrote the story, the basic story treatment there and then. And it didn't change really. I mean, obviously we kind of like honed it and added, a couple of new characters and stuff like that. But the basic story arc was the same there. At the game jam, I guess we got basically the bare bones in the most. The first room, the living room was not the living room, the first bedroom where you hear the piano start playing. That was all in, and we got through to the living room. But the stuff like the bathroom, I don't know if you've played Before I Forget, but it's fine if you haven't. But
No, I have not. But I'm actually looking at it right now. I'm looking at like I like the color. You mentioned the color of it.
Yeah, so that was one of the
Very unique.
decisions we made, was to make it pastel colors and very soft, in the house to be actually a house you want to explore as opposed to a spooky house, because we knew that was partly because we wanted to represent dementia as something ordinary as opposed to supernatural. So we didn't want to have this kind of haunted house kind of effect, because it's just her house. She lives there. And so we wanted,
it looks like a normal old lady's house.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's what we wanted, because we knew we'd also get comparisons to Gone Home, and What Remains of Edith Finch should come out. So there were lots of kind of like houses in video games tend to be creepy. They tend to be kind of like have an atmosphere. And so we wanted to not have that as your initial feeling going into the house. Obviously, as you experience some of the more anxiety-inducing symptoms of dementia, then the house does take on, like, you know, like has deeper shadows and things like that.
I was gonna say, like, as far as the dementia part, how did you go about portraying that, though? You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess dementia can kind of happen in different forms and things like that. So how did you sort of look at it and say, okay, this element of, or that impact of A will happen to B, and the story should happen this way? How did you make that connection as far as to dementia or to just the feeling that you get, like you said, when you're in the room? Like, how did you tie all of that together? Because that is sort of a web of different avenues you can take with that. How did you come up with that sort of way of portraying that feeling?
Yeah, so that's probably the thing that was missing from the game jam, you know, like what we produced at the game jam. It was very kind of surface level. She has lost her memory, and you get memories back when you interact with an object. The first thing we had to do was research dementia, because we knew what we thought it was, but we were like, is it actually what it is?
Right.
Yeah. So we quickly discovered that it's an umbrella term for a whole host of symptoms, and different people get different kinds of symptoms. We started with, I actually already owned a novel that was about a woman with dementia, and it's like a crime mystery, but she's the detective. She has impaired memory, and so she's like trying to keep a grip on, she thinks her friend is missing, and she's got post-it notes everywhere. So that's can be a coping mechanism that several people, so that was really inspiring. That it was an older woman with dementia who retained her agency, and that's what we really wanted. We didn't want to have, so Sunita is our protagonist, and we didn't want her story to be told through the carer or her husband or something. Like, she is the hero of her story. So we watched movies, and then we like looked at documentaries. I found a documentary that was a GP, a general practitioner, so that's a doctor, like just your, you know, like your family doctor that you go to, and but she had dementia, so it was a really interesting perspective because she had the medical knowledge, and also she was personally experiencing it. So lots of research, and then also watching people play very early versions of the game. So we took an early build to, it was like a Comic-Con at the top of my road, just like very, very local little event. And we didn't think it would be a great place to show the game, because it's like, there's like a bunch of kids with their parents going to see like Wookiees and Stormtroopers. And it's like, hey kids, here's the game about an old lady with dementia, and lots of words on screen. But we completely underestimated kids, and they actually really loved it, and it would go and bring their friends back. But it was really interesting because we have this moment where Sunita forgets where the bathroom is. And then we kind of create a sort of PT-inspired loop where every door that she opens returns her back to the hall closet, which is the first place you find when you get into the house. And because she's forgotten, and I could see that people were getting like gamer type, people were getting frustrated, and I'd be like, oh, what did you think of the demo? And they'd be like, yeah, it was good, but like, how do you like beat the bit about the bathroom. And I was like, oh, no, you don't, because she has dementia. She has forgotten. So you don't get there in time. And I could see this kind of light bulb moment in them, which became really pivotal for the game design decisions we made. And it was like, basically, we were subverting player expectations, because players expect to start a game at a low level and gain competence as they go through a game, and they'll be higher level by the end, and like everything will be better. But dementia doesn't do that. Right. So you actually lose, your ability to do things. And so I said to Claire, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. We're playing with the sort of like power fantasy of what games are. And so I think we should really lean into that.
Windrush Tales.
So I am a child of Windrush. So my dad was from Grenada in the Caribbean, and came to the UK in the 50s. So that's part of my heritage. And activists had fought to get Windrush celebrated and marked as a really important moment in British history, and they succeeded. And we now have a Windrush Day on the 22nd of June every year to celebrate the impact of those people who came and basically rebuilt the country after the Second World War. Gotcha. That's why they were invited. So they were invited as British citizens of the Commonwealth to come and help with the labor shortage to rebuild the country. And it was 2018 was going to be, I think it was 2018, was going to be the 70th anniversary. So it was a big anniversary of Windrush, which is the name of the ship, the first ship that came with 400 people, primarily from Jamaica, but from other islands as well, who came and like started this like wave of immigration. I was like, just on my own as a side project, I was like, oh, I really want to mark this somehow. Will I write a story or an essay or do an article somewhere? What shall I do? And then I was like, oh, what about a game? I could do like a little narrative game or something. So I kind of DM'd my friend Corey, and I was like, are you Caribbean heritage? And he was like, yep. And I was like, okay, I've had this idea. Do you want to like write this thing with me? And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. And so apparently he was really excited, but he played it very cool. He was like, yeah. So that's basically how it began, was just me and Corey doing this side project. Then Claire, because Claire's kind of my creative kindred spirit. I was always sort of bounce ideas off her. We just work so well together. I'm really lucky to have met her. She was always kind of like in conversations about the game, and then she came on as a sort of gameplay consultant. Slowly the team started growing. Then we needed an artist, and it was becoming a bigger thing. And then we quietly just kind of like tweeted, oh, we're doing a game about Windrush. And it just kind of exploded. And we got interviewed by The Guardian. People were just like, oh my God, this is amazing. We were like, what? So we didn't expect such a huge response to it. And so then we took it into threefold. We were like, okay, we'll make it a threefold games and like, use that audience that we already have.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, is like, I mean, you kind of already have that audience equity. Yeah. You keep doing good things, people keep coming back.
Right.
Just one more question for you. With where the industry is now, what's next for you? Like, what's the next step as far as the industry in flux? You got different things in play. What's next as far as writing, as far as projects for you? What are your goals here coming up over the next couple of years as far as games, as far as writing? You want to do more articles, or what do you want to work on? Like, just kind of give me like a rundown of like what's on the horizon for you.
Yeah, so I'm still at Massive. I have a new project on the horizon, so that sorry, but I cannot.
There you go.
The classic AAA cannot be mentioned. So, but yeah,
must not be named.
That's exactly. Right. But I'm really excited about the future at Massive. And Windrush Tales is still in development. I was still in like funding talks and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of a tough landscape for indies right now. So we're just going to keep plugging away with that. So we have a nice demo now. We have the narrative is all laid out. All the narrative design is kind of laid out. We kind of have that vertical slice. We need to know what we need to do to finish the game and like go into full production on it, basically. So yeah, that's still incoming. I'm mostly on Blue Sky now, but I am on Twitter as well, and I'm at Chella Ramanan in both places. I'm on Instagram, not really as a games person. I more do book reviews and stuff there, but I'm at Nutmeg Gyal there. So those are my main places. But yeah, people can feel free, like if there are any people who want to get into narrative design or people do DM me and like ask if, I can jump on a call, or like, they ask me questions quite often. And, I always want to hold that door open that I walked through, especially for Black writers in video games. There aren't very many of us, especially in the UK. I've met hardly any. So yeah, like definitely. You don't have to be Black, but it's cool if you are.
No doubt. No doubt.